You'll move the agenda. Thank you. Second. Anybody? Yep. Maureen, thank you. Everybody approved? Yes, hopefully. Yep. Okay. Let's move along. That's approved. Adoption of the minutes. Hopefully everybody had a chance to see, read the minutes from last meeting. Any issues with the minutes? Questions? Nope. Can we have somebody move to the minutes? Thank you, Ron. Second. Thank you, Michael. All in favor? Excellent. That's moved. And we'll go along to public comments. Do we have any members of the public staff? No. Okay, excellent. Moving right along. Delegations. So today we have with us Daron Jennings, who's a local developer with Bowen Island Properties. He does not have video, so for those of you watching, we will be able to hear him but not see him. Welcome, Daron. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got, we're pleased to have you with us. We've got about a half an hour allocated for this, and we have some prompting questions, which I think you have, and they're in our agenda there on page 7. But please feel free to vary from these. We're really just looking for your feedback and to have an interesting, discussion with you about your thoughts on housing on Bowen and what, if anything, the municipality or we could be doing differently to encourage more affordable, attainable, diverse housing.
Certainly. Now, unfortunately, I don't have those questions in front of me. I was just trying to pull them up, and I apologize for this.
Okay.
Let me just.
Can we share? Can I share my screen, or can you share your screen, Steph? Is that allowed?
Or Steph, did you email those? I apologize. I might have missed them if you emailed them to me.
Yes.
And that would have been with the agenda package.
Is that here? I've got them on the screen
Yes.
now. Can you read those?
Just bear with me one sec. I was just pulling up the emails here.
Can everybody else see those?
Oh, I see them now. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Got them. Yeah. Okay, so should we just leap into the big one at the top there?
Sure. Yeah. Go for it. We could probably spend a half an hour on that one.
Well, yeah, yes. So, I mean, I guess from my perspective, doing housing on Bowen since the early 2000s, and actually earlier than that, I did my first house on Bowen in the early 90s, and have been, basically experimenting with how to do housing on the island ever since, from just a pure construction point of view, in terms of vertical construction, and then on to how to do development in a way that's sustainable, achievable, and in the end provide benefit in a fairly difficult environment to do development. And I think the community in general has had a fairly robust taste of that just recently with the struggles in the Cove in respect of the sewer and the water upgrades and so on. And much of what we do as developer is actually the non-glorious, horribly difficult to manage and undertake and risky work that happens underground. And unfortunately, because it happens underground or in the form occasionally of hydro poles and lines, it doesn't receive in the public eye as much attention as it should. And so in a way, although this has been, I can imagine, extremely difficult for those sitting on council and in staff to deal with the perils of utility management, in a way, I think it's a bit of a blessing for the community to realize how important all of that stuff is before we get into the fun discussion, which is what kind of buildings do we need, what kind of facilities do we need, and all of the rest of it, because without the underpinnings of infrastructure, none of it becomes a reality. And so, although difficult, and my phone didn't stop ringing for about 30 hours straight when that realization came to light. And certainly no fingers can be pointed at any one council or council member or whatever. This is a systemic thing that's been going on since a long time. And I have a keen respect for that because of what we've been doing out at Cowan and needing to, on a weekly basis, quite literally, troubleshoot, analyze, undertake problems, make adjustments, phone your consultants. Very, very difficult job. And I think any of the public works guys will attest to this as well, to manage utilities. So number one, let's move forward on that, folks. Everybody, I guess, now understands the importance of it, and that without that, all the fun stuff is not possible. So unfortunately, my comments have gone to infrastructure instead of housing, and I'll shift gears now to housing. You guys have done a tremendous job already identifying where things are deficient and what small steps can be made to move forward. And unfortunately, all of that gets harder in an area that's not sewerized and so on. Not impossible, but harder. So with that, maybe I'll just open to the floor and get some feedback on that, unless you want me to keep blabbering.
Yeah, well, feel free to keep blabbering if you'd like. But yeah, does anybody on the committee have anything in particular that they want to ask Daron or want to hear his feedback on? I mean, I know one thing that I'd be curious about is you did a spot zoning, a pilot project, whatever we want to call it, at the top of Kate's Hill, where you developed the duplexes.
Oh,
and
sure.
I wondered, because that's something, you know, interesting that's happened in the last number of years on Bowen. That was diverse housing. What was that like for you as a developer? How was it challenging in working with the municipality? Was it successful? That's something I'd be curious to hear, because that's, from our point of view as a committee, that would be the type of housing we'd like to encourage more of, or more diverse housing like that. And at the moment, you know, it's not straight on the books that you can build a duplex anywhere. So maybe you could comment on that.
Certainly. And I know, Robin, you know this project well, because you were part of the team that put it together. So in the end, after reflecting on it, after the construction of all 8 units and watching the net result, it was, you know, from the point of view of the user, it was a massive success, because people all of a sudden had access to housing they didn't have before. It diversified the neighbor further than it was already. There was, from the outset, some real confusion as to whether or not duplex zoning would impact the values of the single family houses within the neighborhood as well. And as soon as we were able to clear that up, and thank goodness for the local gymnastics club and dads picking up kids and being able to speak, was that issue cleared up quite quickly before it became toxic. And so in the end, it was a great idea. I'm glad we did it. Did it really make sense from the developer's perspective? Well, not really, because in the end, those buildings were extremely expensive to put together, and couple of reasons. Number one, we had to make sure that they didn't look like the archetypal duplex, which kind of scares people from a aesthetic point of view, because they, you know, traditionally in some areas are boxy and ugly, and that's, I think, as much as anything before the visuals came out of what people were fearful of. But secondly, our topography on Bowen generally is very, very complex. In other words, every one of those houses had different first floor elevations. There were complications because of the need to not have more than 6'6" crawl spaces. And so in the end, the foundations and the complexity of the site work really made those projects expensive in the end. And so whenever we're trying to consider affordable housing projects, the sites and the topo conditions really matter to the end result. And very seldom do we get a chance to actually build on flat ground. And when we do, the difference in the overall numbers is remarkable. And at the end, sometimes it's that $50,000 or $100,000 difference in the total cost of the build that makes the project viable to a rent in a rental perspective. And so I really feel that when we talk about affordable housing, we need to locate the areas on Bowen that make that easier. We all are aware of these very difficult and steep sites that we come up against, and boy, does that ever translate to the bottom line. And in the end, sometimes would make a project that would not cash flow from a rent perspective. So that I'm so glad we did that project. But in the end, as if we were just clear development-minded people, which we're not, we would never do it again. We would look for sites that are friendly in terms of getting up and out of the ground and producing spaces with less arduous site work and foundation considerations.
I think that's great. That's really valuable feedback. And then can I ask you more, like, what was the process like from your point of view as a developer with the municipality? Because I believe you went through a rezoning process.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
was,
get into as many details as you like, but more the idea, like, is there a way maybe the municipality could have facilitated, made it easier? Is there a way, thinking to the future, could they make it easier for other developers to do something similar?
So unfortunately, in those days, there was a lot of staff turnover, and that complicated things immeasurably, not only with that project, but with others. And now with staffs, I'm hoping being comfortable enough to stay for good or for a long while, that's going to make it easier, because as probably everybody can understand, in the municipal system, there sometimes is only a fairly short, if you will, corporate memory. You know, every 4 years you have a change of, you know, in essence, a change of philosophy. And it's been my experience that a lot of the work that was done in the previous 4 years may be lost in the ensuing 4 years and so on. And so to have a staff continuity, to be able to bring that to the table to help council understanding what work was done and not losing, in some cases, very valuable work is key. So that the staff turnover really hurt us in that regard. And it took way too long, and we lost a lot of steam. And quite honestly, we had so much interest in that project, and this is not a word of exaggeration. We actually had our bookkeeper hold a hat. We put all of the names in the hat, and we had the prospective buyers come in and draw out of that hat to be somebody to purchase. So we were well oversubscribed for that idea. So I think, and you folks have already identified that in your work plan and so on, that type of housing is much needed, not just from a rental point of view, but also from a market affordable point of view. And so if you can take what we did in terms of the paper exercise at council and just expand on that, because in the end it was successful and it was well received, and other than needing to do a bit of extra survey work to create the strata titled units, in the end, it fit in with the neighborhood. So I think if you were to talk to most of the neighbors, now here's one challenging part when you try to put more people in one space, is usually comes down to a lack of storage space. And unfortunately, sometimes that stuff spills out to the outside, and we've all seen that. And that likely could be the only complaint, I think, in our experiment on Kate's Hill, in some instances. So I would just say, to staff and council perspective, is in the end it was successful, and whatever we did, whatever steps were taken, could probably be reviewed and just revised to today's standard and save all of that reinvention, if you will.
I have more questions I can follow up with. Does anybody else from the committee have any questions? And hopefully I can, if I'm not responding, it's because I can't see you all. Oh, Daron, go ahead. Yeah, I can't see you all at the same time.
Daron, this is very useful information that you're giving us. I sure appreciate it. Could you clarify for me, when you had your draw, how many units how many units were you building? How many names went in the hat, and when was that?
Oh goodness, I knew that was going to come. Now, Robin, I'm terrible with dates. I mean, I just get so embroiled in what we're doing. I want to say
it was 2015, 2016, that kind of time.
Yeah. So we had a total of 8 units, 4 of which were, and the way we structured the ask to the Muni was to say, hey, let us build what we otherwise could under the land use bylaw. In other words, a house and suite with the same square footages, FSR considerations, setbacks, all of those things. However, let us do it in a way that we can stratify, so that essentially we can create 2 more affordable market sale units than we otherwise would be able to do. And so from an aesthetic point of view, the difference and the reason it became complicated and probably more expensive is we decided to separate them not just in a vertical or in a horizontal sense, and not build them vertically. In other words, of the suite underneath the house, which is commonly done. And we separated into a small unit, essentially side by side to the larger unit. And so to answer your question, we had 8 units total, 4 houses, 4 suites in that configuration I just described. And we had at least, I want to say, now don't hold me to this, but I want to say the interest level was at least double that. And this was before kind of the hysteria of the market that we've seen in the last 2 years, which quite frankly, we didn't expect. And I don't know that anybody really did. So I think more now than ever, when we see the continued escalation in the cost of construction due to labor situations, the step code being implemented probably faster than what was anticipated, and the pressures from that to a standard level of construction, likely in the luxury market, and the sort of luxury home building, much of that requirement was already done already. But when you get into kind of a standard and mid-grade housing side of the equation, the step code and all the mechanical and energy challenges that come with it do have an impact on the bottom line. And so those buildings there, if we were to build them today, there would be increased mechanical challenges and energy challenges due to the step code, which would the net result would be an increase in construction cost as well. So nothing's getting easier in that regard. And that's why, from my perspective, very pragmatically, the site matters to begin with. And if you have an easy site to negotiate your way up and out of versus some of our more treacherous ones, you're way ahead of the game.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions that they'd like? Yeah, Fritz, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to just ask Daron, I want to compare something with the city of Vancouver. So what, we do work for residential homes in the city of Vancouver, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, so in their wisdom, they rezoned all RS1 and RS5 in a way, but they don't call it rezoning because it says that these neighborhoods are still single-family neighborhoods. The intent is to retain the single-family character, but within the maximum, the volume of the house, the square footage stays the same, the maximum. But as an owner, you can basically cut it up into stratas, and depending on the size of the house, you also can have each unit a secondary suite or a lock-off suite. Now, we're doing one house like that. This far, we haven't heard anything negative about it,
Mm-hmm.
So, so what I'm saying is that if Bowen would do the same, and the key thing is, the way it's written in the bylaw, it says the intent of that zoning schedule is to protect and maintain the single-family character. And what's very clever about it too, is in that zone, you're actually not allowed to have laneway houses, which they previously actually could do. And the theory is that the neighborhood stays green and people just have smaller homes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm just wondering if Bowen would do the same, maybe not all over the island. You want to be careful, of course, but you select specific neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, I've read about those models in some of the trade magazines and so on, certainly. And I think, Vancouver is a perfect environment as to why it has to happen. We see what's going on with pricing there. And, quite frankly, I think Bowen's probably in an immediate timeline from a market point of view. It's more poignant for Bowen, considering how quickly things have escalated cost-wise here. So it may be that just to maintain our diversity and so on, that we're forced to make decisions like that. And I think there certainly are areas of Bowen. Obviously, there's a lot of large lots, and this was kind of used as a backdrop for the accessory buildings for residential use, to say, look, if you have a big enough property, why would the neighbors be affected if you were to do an accessory building and so on. So I think that's something that, probably, knowing Bowen's history, that probably should be considered, would be the neighborhood, the lots, the existing lot sizes, the existing house sizes, and so on. And as you suggest, Fritz, maybe not, carte blanche island wide, but in certain areas, that could be an incentive for people to make those changes. And I do know that some families that live on larger lots in larger homes are already doing that, just out of common sense. And it may be that they're not lock-off suites or legal suites, but
Yeah.
we're seeing intergenerational situations where, there's nowhere to send mom or dad because there's just nothing to age gracefully in. Why wouldn't the kids and the grandkids move in? And, I think there's real opportunity there, given the number of larger buildings that are on the island, to say, hey, why wouldn't we make it legal? Which was the same problem leading up to the accessory building for residential bylaw that was finally passed, is that people were doing it illegally anyway. And council and staff in those days, me being one of them, we all knew about it. But there was such seemingly desperation for people to have viable housing options that everybody kind of looked the other way. And likely what comes of that, hopefully, are not, house fires and things from shot at electrical and so on. So I would say, yeah, we should look at those options. Probably not as easy as what we've just discussed, but in the end, it would be kind of irresponsible if we didn't, I think, in a way.
Okay. So I also want to ask you another question. Like, this kind of been on my mind for quite a while. You know that with the difficulty of the sewer system, you know, what I thought is that, you know, if you have a lot that is twice the size that you need for the building or whatever, and you put a temporary septic field on it, and you use that for the time period until one day the municipality may have reached it with the sewer. So kind of have, the other thought in that actually is that maybe another way to look at septic is that if the municipality would have a septic field somewhere at a distance, and you would have to truck, you know, sewage, you know, for a certain amount of time from A to B. But maybe starting with the first one, you know, kind of how actually modest the size of a septic field can be in comparison to the development that it serves, right?
Mm-hmm.
So could you see any use in that?
Well, that's a really good question, and really a complex one in the end, in my opinion. Having you know, for many years we built sewer systems, you know, finite sewer systems that are carefully regulated on a weekly basis, and all of those sorts of things. And that's certainly, knowing that that's working well, makes construction easier, because you're not worried about trying to find the suitable soils conditions, and sometimes in very rocky terrain, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, with the challenge of rebuilding a sewer system and a collection system, and again, that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is it's not just the sewer plant, it's actually all the pipe work and the pump systems and the electrical provision and the backup required for with generators and so on, that make why this stuff is so expensive and so time consuming to actually put in the ground. So certainly in that lens, a septic field and a septic system that can be built in a week is a much easier short-term solution. But the problem I see with septic fields over the long term, and we're talking decades here, is that traditionally people forget about them. It's the same old situation where nobody once has ever come to us and said, hey, we love what you're doing. Can you please show us the water plant and the sewer plant that you spent millions of dollars on to make this? You know, nobody cares. And so the point I'm trying to make, being as pragmatic as possible, is that septic fields are good and fine, but generally speaking, people forget to pump them out. People forget to maintain them. Some of them become real health hazards. And I'm talking now from a real situation that my mom finds herself in with a shared septic field, whereby even Vancouver Coastal Health isn't stepping to the plate to determine that this is a health hazard, when it doesn't take a scientist or an expert to realize it is. So my fear about septic fields over time is just the lack of any maintenance protocol that happens. And we're all guilty of it, whether we want to admit it or not, me included. I just said to my wife, Deanna, last night, probably not the best choice over Sunday dinner to mention that we should probably deal with our septic tank this summer. So I have reservations in dense neighborhoods, especially when we have drinking water and other areas, to say that reliance on septic fields going into the future is really a totally smart idea. So I have, you know, mixed emotions there, certainly.
Well, okay, it's of course not intended to be permanent. And if you look at Belterra, I always think it's kind of a good example, because they have a septic field right beside them, and the moment it's a strata with more units in it, it's more likely that they actually have a maintenance program in place.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. And that's where I was going to go next, was to say that, you know, from the municipality's point of view, to have a local service area and to give people the choice as to whether they want to hook into a system or not. Now, let's just suppose the system becomes up and running, you know, in 5 years, and it's good and fine. The immediate challenges I see with this, and this is born from our experience running our utilities out at Cowan Point. So we run the sewer system out there and the water system, and it's a lot of work. And in the end, we use all of the data gained to help plan and forecast what's needed in reserve. And now we're legislated to have reserve funds as private utilities, which is different in the municipal arena. And that therein can lie some problem where if it's elective as to how much money goes in to sustain systems in the sense of reserve funds, if they're not topped up when needed, maybe you have major problems where you're borrowing from other reserves, which could pose issues from the point of view of other users or other areas of the island. And so kind of lost my train of coming back to septic there. I apologize, but forgive me. There was a good point in all of that, and then I got lost in reserve funds.
That's okay.
Well, for the stratas, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
back to the sort of how do you ensure maintenance of sewage systems? And certainly, Fritz, is a very good point. If you had a mixed housing development, let's say let's just use community lands lot 1, for example, and that's next to the works yard and across from the school, down the street from the school on Mount Gardner. Certainly there could be some sort of a communal system at a small scale and on a maintenance program that would ensure the health of the system going forward. That would be easy to do. The problem with that model, though, over time is, and we've done some preliminary experimentation on the Shire project that we have, the area right near to Lee Automotive, that hillside. And we've done with our septic engineer some preliminary layouts of what it would actually take if you wanted to build, and we just used a 20-unit apartment as a benchmark study, and what sort of a field would be required. And we even suggested that we go to a type 3 treatment system, which reduces the size of the field. And in the end, it's pretty alarming how big your fields have to be for larger, let's just say more than single family and single family suite units. So septic is an alternative, certainly, but it does, in the end, for multifamily, will eat up significant areas. And if you don't have the green space on the site to allow for that, it may become unviable as a result. So it's a challenging issue.
Yeah, I think that's helpful because we're talking, a lot of the issues we talk about are, where does density go, right? And a lot of it's been in the Cove, which we know is now going to be limited because of the sewer system problems. We start talking about it on other parts of the island, but I think this really highlights it. As you say, the really unglamorous part of development is the infrastructure, and not only water, which I think a lot of people are aware of, but like where is it septic? And are we, in those neighborhoods where it's already pretty dense, is it appropriate to be putting more housing in there when septic's already, potentially at capacity? I'm thinking of places like Deep Bay, where those lots are tiny and tons of them have septic already. So on very small lots. So does anybody else have thoughts? Otherwise, I might go back to our questions. I'm curious about if you have anything to share on updates on your recent projects and any timelines on those, if you have anything to share with us.
Yes. Well, actually, to be perfectly frank, the setback in the Cove, which I think we were by and large aware of in the back of our minds, but certainly not so immediately, because we were always focused on what we call the Shire, which is the area formerly called Parkview Slopes, Artisan Slopes, and the area right adjacent Lee Automotive that stretches up the hill to meet the Kates Hill Village. I mean, we were really keen to get something started there from a pure sort of rental diversity point of view, where we would consider all different unit sizes and typologies, like you folks in your past work have identified, everything from micro homes to 3-bedroom sort of walk-up townhouses and so on. We're realizing that to do that is a very, very complex equation for all of the things we've talked about already. Number one, just the need to upgrade the existing sewer plant, upgrade it's not only its capacities, but the outflow, the collection system, which is fairly complex when you start to link all of the community lands into that. And when you really look at topography in a sort of an organic and fulsome way, and consider the whole Cove, not just project by project, and that when it comes to utility implementation can be extremely dicey if you go project by project versus looking at the whole and figuring out a way to implement a strategy in phases for the whole. And so realizing how complex that equation is, and realizing that we need to get something in the ground to provide some diversity and some relief to people. And I use that word relief not too hesitantly, because of the number of times my phone rings to say, is there anything you can do for us? And so we're going to focus our immediate attention, or just finalizing actually the application to come to staff and council for the area, as we're calling it now, of Seymour Village, which is the area between between Cowan Point Drive, Fairweather Road, and the 7th fairway of the golf course. It's an area that has some friendly building sites. It's got good south exposure. It's low-hanging fruit in development speak, because it's got a sewer line, a water line, and a hydro line nearby. We have sufficient water to provide. We have sufficient sewerage to provide, and other than the struggles with BC Hydro and TELUS and Shaw, traditionally it's something that could be implemented right away once the zoning is in place. So that one we will bring forward. It has its limitations as to its location. Cowan's a lovely place, but is it the right place for housing for young people and for families and for those that need to commute on a daily basis? Cowan's a wonderful place if you're nearing retirement, can work from home, are fairly affluent, can afford 2 cars, all of those things. As soon as you take those specifics out of the equation, all fingers point back to the Cove. And so in the interim, our thinking is to provide some real opportunities at Seymour Village in lieu of nowhere else really that we have that can do it. And then find a creative way by which we bring forward some ideas on the Shire vis-a-vis what Fritz just illustrated, which was, let's find a way to get septic in the ground so that we can start some phased projects that allow for diverse rentals. And then the idea being that over the course of time, as the infrastructure hopefully is looked at in a fulsome manner, all community lands and stakeholder lands in that equation, then the implementation unfolds over the course of time to sewerize the Cove again. And so that's sort of in a nutshell where we're going to focus. Now, in order to do all of that transparently and to pay for it all, it may be that we bring certain sections of each project together in a way that allows them to, if you will, to pencil out in the end. So we're quite excited on what we've come up with. It addresses some of the boxes, checks some of the boxes, certainly doesn't address them all, but at least it's a start. So that's coming up. We're hoping to have that within the next, and now Daniel's going to probably be shaking his head because we've been using with this, and it's not an easy equation by any stretch of the imagination. And in a way, the Snug Cove sewerage issue made it easier because it made us focus in one place essentially. So Daniel will be shaking his head because we've met with Daniel for probably 3 or 4 years around rezonings and have never had the courage to bring them forward in a way that we felt would be received well and would be implementable without major pain. So we're quite excited to bring that forward in the next, hopefully 4 to 6 weeks.
Great. Well, I think I'll certainly speak for myself as from I view my role here at the Housing Advisory Committee. That's really exciting. I think it's great news to have some diversity. Maureen has a question. I think then we're going to have to wrap up with Daron. So Maureen, that you can have the final question, the final ask.
Thank you. Thank you, Daron. This has been extremely helpful and very timely. My question has to do with the Seymour Village project. Could you say a little bit more about what the makeup of that project will be? How many units you were anticipating and so forth? I know we'll see it when it comes to council, but is there anything you can share at this point?
Yes, certainly. I always hesitate to talk units because it's right now we're trying to figure that out. What I can say is it's definitely mixed use. So it does contemplate not only, because we're very cognizant of the economic drivers on the island as well. And I think COVID, for the first time since I graduated from university in the early 90s, which was supposed to be, how we would operate in a satellite fashions, has proven that with the right setup, you can actually do that. And I think that Bowen will be if we position ourselves as a community well, could attract real entrepreneurial talent to the island, whereby they don't need the big commute to the big office building downtown. And with that in mind, we realize that we need to make sure that those spaces are considered as well, so that we have not only the housing addressed in all different forms and really for all different ages, because not only do we obviously need spaces for young people, young families, but equally so, in my estimation, places for people to age gracefully over the course of time, so that stress on the family and on everybody, on the individual and so on, is lessened. And so the key at Seymour Village is really to create all types of housing, and with a focus ultimately on what we're calling independent and supportive living initiatives, which allows a certain amount of infrastructure and amenity service to be in place as well, which in turn creates jobs for young people to be on the island. In other words, people to maintain the grounds, people to provide the food service, which I think could be very effective, people to wash windows and clean gutters, which of course we're all realizing now is hard and few and far between to help out. Well, I'm already soliciting the local teenagers that I used to coach soccer to come and help work this summer, just because we need that kind of work done. So all of those reasons say diverse housing units. I'm hesitant to talk at this point, but it would be enough certainly for a 10-year period. Again, not ideal for those needing to be close to the cove, but if we do have a volume of people there, my thinking is that there's probably a way with car share models to create shuttle bus systems that are efficient and reduce the amount of reliance on single car ownership and all of those kind of things. We're really pushing the envelope to get the car to the periphery. I'm tired of, and Fritz probably can, and Robin can attest to this, tired of letting the car rule the decision-making around circulation. And so we're really trying to push for a really pleasant, diverse and green neighborhood that has less to do with the car and more to do with the living and the services therein.
Okay, thank you very
Great.
much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darren. We've got to wrap it up. We've got several other things to get through, but thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I think that was really valuable. And I'm guessing we could probably have you again in some time, because I think there's even more to discuss, but we'll look forward to at least seeing that rezoning project. So that's great news.
Sounds good. And thank you all for your efforts to sit on a committee and actually stretch your necks out. A lot of people have the courage. They like to talk, but they don't do it. So thank you on behalf of the community.
Thanks, Darren. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Take care. Bye for now.
Okay, we have next 5.1 council referrals. So detached secondary suite minimum lot size review, and I'll hand it over to Daniel.
Thanks, Robin. So you'll see on the agenda the council or the staff report and presentation to council from January. And then I can just go over the same presentation with you if you want to see it in more detail. And then I'm happy to take questions throughout as I talk or at the end. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out my screens. All right, do you see that okay, the presentation?
Yep.
All right. So this is a council direction that came out of the committee of the whole that the Housing Advisory Committee held with council in October. And one of the directions from that meeting was to research the potential of reducing lot size for secondary suites. So as this committee knows, we permit detached secondary suites on Bowen Island, and we permit them to take place on properties with a minimum lot size of 0.36 hectares, which is about 9/10 of an acre. So one of the things that we've had the planning department look at is just the overall lot sizes on Bowen and residential properties in particular, and what are the sizes that are there. So when we did that GIS analysis, what we found is there's about 800 lots on Bowen that are over that size, or 888 is the number we came, that are over 0.36 hectares, so are large enough to build a detached secondary suite. And then we just looked at sort of the brackets going down in size and to see what that would do. And I think, there we go. So it's about a third of the lots on Bowen are large enough to have a detached secondary suite. About a third of them are under 0.15 of a hectare, which is, I think that's about 0.4 of an acre. Sorry, 0.4 of a hectare is 1 acre, 0.2 is half an acre. And then as we go down in size, what we found is sort of this like bracketing then of, you know, sort of divides roughly into, if you go down to 0.3, you get another about 100 units, and going down to 0.25 of a hectare, you add 85 lots and so on through. And then what we looked at a little bit was just the location of those properties and where they would be. And I apologize that the coloring changes between these different presentations, but essentially the yellow being ones that are already large enough to have a detached secondary suite. And I'll just show you, there's a couple zoom in. So this is Blue Water and Tunstall area. So you see sort of the dispersion of it. There's yellow throughout, and then but where the orange and the sort of going down to red as lots get smaller, fairly spread out. This is then in Miller's Landing, Seven Hills type area. So again, it's sort of looking at, okay, what would the impact be? How many units are we talking about? What are the sizes of them? And then we just flagged in the staff report that there are other considerations to be thought of in allowing smaller lot sizes. So one is, you know, is there capacity in the area adding units? Do we need to look at other density provisions that do restrict detached secondary suites? And then wanting to consider maybe looking at the development permit guidelines for detached secondary suites, which currently exist, but are quite loose. And I know it's a conversation that the Housing Advisory Committee's had before, is that if we're allowing them on smaller lots, do the development permit guidelines get more restrictive in how they're sort of trying to shape where detached secondary suites go in smaller lots? So this is the council recommendation. Took this report and referred it to the Housing Advisory Committee and the Advisory Planning Commission for input on specifically this desired minimum lot size for detached secondary suites, and we'll bring that discussion back to council to see how they want to proceed. So I'm going to stop at that point.
Okay, great. Thank you, Daniel. Does anybody on the committee have any thoughts or questions based on Daniel's presentation there?
Yeah, maybe one thing.
Fritz and then Ron. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's really a difference in how much frontage a lot has. Like, give an example. I always thought that municipalities should have something called corner lot zoning, because corner lots are really different than lots that are in a row, because like they have far more street frontage and it's much easier to provide separate car access and all these kind of things. So I also thought for pilot projects, it would be a good one because there's far less risk of dispute. There's more parking along the road and it goes on and on. So like if you have a narrow frontage and your lot is deep, it's just more difficult to make that work, you know, from a design point of view. The other thing that can complicate matters, and Daron was saying that too, it's topography. You know, it makes a huge difference in the potential of a lot. Like if you, for instance, if we get somebody in our office, a potential client who wants to buy a lot, then we normally say, well, did you look at the corner lot, you know? As a start.
Okay, thanks, Fritz. Ron, did you have any, what was your question or thought?
Well, I'm wondering, given that, given the regulations concerning lot coverage, why would there be any limit at all on the minimum lot size for a detached secondary suite?
Yeah, and I don't know, Ron, if you remember, so it was rezoned in 2016, I think is when they were permitted.
Yes.
And we did through that bylaw development process, and we did several rounds of the bylaw. And so initially, I think it had a 0.4 hectare, 1 acre minimum lot size that came from an earlier recommendation. And then when staff first brought the bylaw, we had no minimum lot size and said, you know, other restrictions apply. You know, you need to meet lot coverage, setbacks, and whatever else. And then we did some outreach and we did an island-wide survey, and essentially the results of that survey were quite strongly people thinking that it should be a 1 acre minimum lot size. And so we then put that in the bylaw. And then we got comments from a number of people saying that their lots were 1 acre lots that were created in the 60s or 70s or whatever. And based on the survey techniques at the time, their lots are actually just below 1 acre. And there's a number of lots that are 1 acre lots, which are just under. So the council lowered the minimum lot size to capture those ones that were basically an acre, but not quite. But it is a sort of a conversation that, we allow attached secondary suites, regardless of lot size. And that can be based on our bylaw, that can be in an accessory building that's connected by a walkway to the main house. And so you start to go, well, if we allow that, is it a whole lot different if you just don't have a walkway connecting it and it's separate? Yeah. Maybe it's not different, but then it does open up. Well, then it could look different than if we allow it detached secondary suite. It could be somewhere else completely on the lot. And, yeah.
Well, it sounds like from what you're saying, Daniel, that really there's no good reason from a planning point of view, but for some reason there was purely political opposition to opening it up.
I don't know, political or like neighborhood opposition and sort of fear of change of the neighborhood and like, okay, what's my neighbor now going to be able to build on their property?
The difference between detached and attached is that detached, you can purposely put the unit as far away from your own house and as close as possible to your neighbor. That's the difference. Like if you have an attached unit, mind you, you can probably make the longest corridor ever that is heated. But let's assume that people wouldn't do that, because that's the same thought, right? You want to, but there's also a reason why, the reason why the detached suites are successful in being rented out is exactly that it doesn't affect your own pleasure of your own lot. So it's a conscious decision. Like, for instance, if I may give an example again about a corner lot, and you have, let's say, 100 or 50 feet frontage on one side, and you have 120 on the other, and that secondary detached suite is sitting in your backyard, it's almost like it's your neighbor, Mm-hmm. Your neighbor's house can be much closer than your own detached suite. So the idea that those ones are easily rented out, it's like a no-brainer, Well, I rate because even people probably get more money for it because these cute little houses that are basically independent from the mothership,
Mm-hmm. I see Michael's got his hand up. Ron, did you have something quick to say in reference to Fritz's comments there, or Daniel's?
Well, just one quick comment, and that is as regards proximity to the neighbors. I think much of that can be mitigated by rules about placement of windows, so that you're not directly looking onto the person's backyard or into their bedroom. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I know I'm pretty sure City of Vancouver laneway houses have similar kind of guidelines. So there's examples out there. Michael, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. I think you've raised an absolutely dynamite point of view here, because the point of view that the point you raised, and the fact, Daniel, that we do have the regulations in place. With increasing pressure, one really wonders whether this lot size is simply an appendix. It's simply a thing of the past, and whether our building bylaws can cover off sufficiently satisfactorily to allow people to develop in a tasteful and appropriate way, and whether this regulation through size of lot is something we could set aside for a different set of regulations. And thank you very much, Ron, for raising this point, because I really think it's time our conversation moved on away from just lot size to some more appropriate parameters to ensure that what we do doesn't destroy regional neighborhood character, doesn't spoil the environment, etc., etc., etc. And I just think it's this lot size is beginning to sound more and more archaic, and one can see subsequent councils simply reducing the lot size time and time again. And I'm just wondering whether a conversation could be held rather to do away with lot size and look at another way that we can approach this, because I think the time has come when we should seriously consider it. So there we go.
Okay. I just have one quick question for Daniel to clarify, and then Maureen, I see your hand. Daniel, is this proposed amendment to remove the lot size entirely so that every lot would be available, or is it a reduction, or is that what you're looking for, is feedback on where do we go, or is it completely removed?
Looking for feedback, I think. So the council direction was to consider research potential of reducing lot size.
Okay, so it hasn't been said one way or the other. Okay, Maureen,
Yeah.
please. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Robin. I'm going back to Ron, his point about whether the size was a political decision or not. And, I mean, ultimately, yes, it was political, and that council through bylaw established this. But I think there just was real uncertainty about what the impact would be. Whether the uptake would be fast, and it hasn't been. People have been sensible about their decision-making processes and really understanding the costs involved in creating detached secondary suites. So the intent had been to monitor the uptake and see what happened. And if there were problems that resulted, then further action would be taken. And essentially, this is the further action. We know what the uptake has been, and we know that the initial recommendation from planning had been that there be no size limit to the lots, and that there were other factors that would come into play, some of which were listed on Daniel's presentation slide. But in discussion at council, if I'm remembering correctly, there also was the specific point of sewer and septic capacity being factors that needed to be included there and given high profile. So I guess my question is for Daniel, and it's to ask about how you would see a reduction in the minimum lot size relating to the conservation development policy that is underway. So question for Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, to what extent it goes with the conservation development policy, based on the latest council discussion, is to be at rezoning stage. I think one effect that it might be is if say it was a reduction in lot size, is that right now we do see subdivisions, or at least like potential subdivisions, people gear them around the minimum lot size of the detached secondary suite. So they know that at 0.36 hectares, the lots can have a detached secondary suite, and smaller than that, they can't. So there's incentive in doing a subdivision to make as many of your lots as possible be 0.36 hectares in size. If the minimum lot size was instead was 0.2 hectares, say, so half acre lots, maybe then you could see smaller lots and a bigger park dedication without that same impact on people.
Mm-hmm. If I can throw in as well, because if my 2 cents on that thought, because it's a great question, Maureen. In my mind, the intent behind a conservation development policy is concentrating housing and development where the infrastructure already is, where closer to things, and leaving as much green space as possible. So in my mind, allowing more secondary suites where infrastructure exists, and obviously it has to be proven that it can take it, but already where roads are, already where systems are, water and everything, I feel like that meets the intent, because if you can create more housing in those existing places rather than taking down swaths of green, I feel like it's kind of meeting that intent. I don't know, Maureen, if that's where you were going at all, or if that helps, but that's what my thought was immediately when you mentioned it.
Yeah, it does help, but I think part of the whole notion of conservation development is also to concentrate the homes in a smaller area of the lot itself. So if we think back to the various scenarios that Fritz has provided about, very large lots and where do the houses get put, and whether they're in close proximity or they're as far apart as they possibly can be on that lot, which does not lead necessarily to maximizing the use of the existing infrastructure.
Yeah,
So,
fair enough.
So I'm asking a genuine question here. I just,
Yeah.
How do these two initiatives that are moving forward, how do they relate to each other?
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate Daniel's comment that by keeping the lot size large, I hope I've understood this, by keeping the lot size large, what we're doing is we're ensuring that future subdivision will be larger lots and less potential conserved green space. Did I get that straight, Daniel? That's what you were.
Yeah, I mean, that was just me thinking of it, but that would be one, as we have noticed, like in subdivision applications, there's incentives for those to be, that size of lot.
So,
Oh, sorry, we do, if it's important because we're running behind already. So I want to try to get us back on track and moving on to the next referral that we've got. Do you want to have just one quick comment and then I have a couple of thoughts and we'll move on?
yeah, I just wondered if you allowed two homes to be on a lot, then you should also question the size. So for instance, going back to the example that I gave from Vancouver, if you would give a maximum size, and you can divide it any way you want. You build two smaller homes, for instance. I mean, it's kind of, I find also like I find the secondary home kind of discussion a bit strange in a way, because it still has the word secondary in it. Like, it doesn't really seem to address in a broader way the demand. Like if you have a family and there's a brother and a sister or so, and they each want to build a house on that lot from their parents, can it be the same size? No, why? I just don't get it. Like if you want to promote diversity, the secondary suite comes from a mortgage helper. There's poor people and there's rich people. There's people that have equity and people don't have equity. That's what I see, but that's what I hear in that word.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, hopefully, these discussions of the other types of zoning, duplex zoning, multiplex zoning, everything can come into that. Because I think that's more what you're talking about, Fritz, is actually, starting to talk about those things. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Daniel, did you want to say anything? I saw you.
No, it's okay.
Nope. Okay, so I think I'll just chip in my 2 cents to sum up. Steph and Daniel, we don't need like a recommendation or anything. This was just feedback for Daniel to hear, and or do we need something?
I think a recommendation for council would be good. The council's looking for, for feedback.
Okay. So Steph, are you able to get screen share a Word doc or something as we sort of start to wordsmith this? Steph's looking a little
I am. I'm hoping I'm capturing. I've already.
That's all right. I'll help you. Like we'll work, because I'm going to sort of summarize a little bit. I think what I got from it is so my personal opinion. We'll see what everybody else chimes in at. Is I think that any lot size limit should be removed. I think that seemed to be the general thought. That for a bunch of different reasons that people have already said. The other one being I think we talked about you can generally make an attached suite right now by a breezeway or hallway or whatever it is. The other thing I know that came up on a project I was asked to look at was some folks wanted to build a detached secondary suite, but their lot wasn't the right size. They went to planning, they found out they could build a detached accessory building for residential use. So they could basically build the same thing, but it couldn't have a full kitchen. It could have a small kitchen, and it could be used for Airbnb, like a B&B or the short-term rental use. So they were really frustrated because they could basically build the same thing, but it couldn't have a long-term tenant, which is actually what they wanted. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, but that sort of seemed to be an experience of one of the people that approached me to help them.
Sorry, Robin, just to be clear, it couldn't be used as a short-term rental. It could be a B&B building.
Okay, fair enough. That's good to know.
And then, often we get people who say, oh, it just means I can't have a kitchen, I can't have a stove, but otherwise I can do what I want. And we say, well, no, it can't be used or intended to be used as a dwelling. But you can build like an accessory guest bedroom building.
Right. Yeah.
But you can't, if you're doing that intending to use it as a dwelling, you're still against the bylaw.
Fair enough. Yeah. But I guess what I'm thinking, and thank you for the clarification. I'm thinking it's like physically the size of the building, the location on the site, and if it's a B&B, you have people coming and going, parking issues. If it's a guesting or like, for instance, referring to family, it's a in-law suite, whatever you kind of want to call it. It's essentially being used as the same thing, but in theory, in terms of number of people, physical location on site. So, yeah, so for a bunch of different reasons, and all of the ones everyone said, I won't repeat it because we're running short on time. I'm personally in favor of just simply removing the lot limit and let all of those other parameters, take precedence: the water, the sewer, the site coverage, height, all of those things. Maureen, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, it's just a passing thought, but the more we talk about the complexities of some of these regulations, the more I wonder, if someone were starting from scratch,
Yeah.
what would it look like?
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't look like this pretzel making landscape that we have at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if that makes its way into a comment to council. I'm not sure if it's supported as a comment to council, but anyway, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, sorry, first, Steph, could you zoom in a bit? I'm not sure how everybody else is doing, but if you could just zoom in so that's a little bit bigger on the screen. I agree, Maureen. I don't know if this would be the language you would choose, but I would say, that the lot size limit was a fairly arbitrary number. Like, yes, it was community feedback and everything. So I'm not saying it didn't have reasons behind it, but as Daniel's saying, it's potentially driving future subdivisions. It's potentially, valuing different properties differently because you can do this or that. So in that way, I think it's fairly arbitrary, and I feel like it served its purpose as a step. I'm not saying it was the wrong thing to do. I think valuing community feedback is really valid, and I think it was a correct step to take at the time. And now we've seen it, and I think the community is very accepting of it, and it hasn't been this, massive overtaking of the island. So I feel like now's the time. Okay, so be it resolved. Does everybody agree with that no minimum lot size, or am I trumping other people on the committee? Is anybody feeling differently about that we don't want that to be the committee feedback?
Well, the question, I guess, is it all outright, or is there a conditional component to it?
So we do have.
Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I was going to say there's a development permit that has guidelines for detached secondary suites. So that point of it would be conditional. They're fairly loose right now, and they're exempt if you're further from property lines. So that piece of it is conditional. There's a conditional review.
And I think it's good to keep that in, especially when we're talking about them being close to neighbors and in smaller neighborhoods. And I really value Ron's comments, if it isn't in there already, about windows facing away and open like landscape spaces, so private outdoor spaces being well considered. So some of the guidelines, if they don't include those, I don't remember them off the top of my head, if they don't include those kinds of things, I think would be valuable to revise and include. Okay, so let's look at where it's.
Do you want me to add that, Daniel, then, that about the development permit guidelines? Is that an actual document?
Yeah, it's section 7.6 of the land use bylaw.
So
I think that sums it up. It's pretty simple. Sorry, Fritz, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, because like what we like about the floor space ratio is that there can be a bonus as well. So the idea would be to encourage people to build either secondary suites, attached, detached, whatever. You can promote that by giving a higher floor space ratio to inclusion of some sort of secondary accommodation.
So can I jump in, Fritz? Steph, could we put at the bottom of this, where it's after the therefore paragraph, could we say, in addition, we recommend reviewing the building bylaw to consider floor space ratios and bonuses or incentives, maybe let's call it incentives, for constructing secondary suites and other desired housing forms, something like along those lines. Fritz, does that? Because I don't know if today in this revision and what they're considering, we can say implement these, but I think we can say, hey, now that you're doing this, we recommend that you further look into this this next thing as another step.
Yeah, and to be effective with that, you actually have to review the floor space ratio that's existing. And let me tell you why, because like, if you have a floor space ratio and let's say you can build the house that you want, but you would like to have more space for some good reasons, right? Then if there's a bonus for a rental ready secondary suite, if you're going to rent it out or not, people will take the bonus for sure. They're going to build it. And so the, what I also like as a concept, which is maybe a bit too much to all deliver at the same time, but I really like it that there are flex spaces in between secondary suites and the principal residence.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of the idea about a lock-up suite, right? But it's just a room that sits in between the two. And what it does, that the user of the secondary suite can have access to more space if the user of the other suite doesn't need it. So it makes housing far more flexible. It's not that difficult with the code. You know, your separation.
It's just a few extra fire separate. Yeah, I've done the same on a project myself. A couple of basement bedrooms were for the house, but they could be locked off and made for the suite. So yeah. Okay, I'd like to move on because we're very behind already, and we have more to get through today. So if everybody's okay, do we want to read? Do I need to read this out, Steph? Is that the best way to do it? Should I read out the? Okay, so whereas zoning restrictions such as floor space ratio, okay, sure, we'll leave that in. Floor space ratio, site coverage, lot line setbacks, water and sewer are currently in place at Bowen Island Municipality, or maybe that could be in the current land use bylaw. Maybe that's in the current land use bylaw. That might be more accurate. Including those stipulated in the development permit guidelines, section 7.6 of the LUB. Therefore, be it resolved that the Housing Advisory Committee recommend that there is no minimum lot size required to build detached secondary suites, and that the land use bylaw be reviewed to consider floor space ratios and incentives for construction of secondary suites and other desired housing forms. I might just add that in the near future, that land use bylaw be reviewed. So, or I don't know, maybe that's not needed, but
I mean, you're still recommending it. Council or in the near future.
Well, I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying they review it now in the context of this approving this bylaw, but that when this gets approved, that could be a next step. So I'm thinking the in the near future is at the beginning of the sentence, that in the near future, the land use bylaw be reviewed.
Reviewed in the near future.
Yeah. Sure. I think in the near future. Yeah.
Here?
Yep, sure. I think it's fine. It's unless there's grammar mistakes, I think that works. Does that work for everybody? Can we pass that? I'll motion it.
Can we just add in after recommend, Steph, just recommend to council that there be, just so it's clear.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else, any other comments before we pass this and move on? Seeing none, okay, I'll motion. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Steph.
You're right, maybe just that council directs staff to remove the minimum lot size requirement.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yes, Daniel?
I'll let you and Daniel wordsmith that.
Sorry.
Yep.
Like that there be no, okay, sorry.
To remove the minimum lot. Okay,
I'll do that editing.
Okay, yeah, I think just to remove the minimum lot size requirement, but otherwise I think that's good. Any other comments before we pass this? No, okay, I'm gonna motion it. Do I have a seconder? Somebody? Yep, Michael, thank you. All in favor? Everyone's hands up. Excellent. Fritz, are you in favor of this?
Yeah, I'm in favor, but I would like to add a whole bunch of stuff to it.
I know you will. We'll do it another day. Okay. So is that all? That's all good, Steph?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Great,
let's move on,
you.
because I know we've got another thing. Daniel has another couple of things for us to get through. So 5.2, Arbutus Ridge detached secondary suites. At least we're in the mindset already. So there we go.
Yeah, there we go. So this is a rezoning application that the Housing Advisory Committee has seen before, but it has changed since you saw it last. So this is a rezoning application. in the Arbutus Ridge zone. So specifically this case, it's 1676 Malcolm Creek Road on the west side of Bowen Island. So this had come to the committee before as a rezoning application for the entire of the Arbutus Ridge comprehensive development zone, or area 1 of that zone, that doesn't allow accessory residential use. It doesn't allow detached or attached secondary suites. And so when we had brought the rezoning back to council for direction to go to first reading, the direction at that point was to essentially sever the rezoning application and just proceed with the portion of that CD zone that doesn't fall within the King Edward Bay water system. So the King Edward Bay water system had recommended to council that council not proceed with the rezoning application within the King Edward Bay water system until an MOU had been reached between Westside Water Systems. So council directed staff to proceed with the rezoning application just for this property in 1676 Malcolm Creek Road. So just to overview, the CD 18 Area 1 zone permits detached dwellings and doesn't permit accessory residential use. So it doesn't permit secondary suites. Has fairly standard density regulations, so 25% lot coverage. It has a maximum floor area of all buildings, excluding garages and accessory buildings, and it has a maximum number of accessory buildings on a lot. So 16.7 Malcolm Creek Road has zoning to become 4 lots and has an active subdivision to create those 4 lots, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then on this map, lot number 5 is a park dedication at that top triangle corner. So there's an amendment bylaw that received first reading that would create an area 4 for this area to allow that accessory residential use. It would stipulate that the floor area, the maximum of 260 square meters, would include the accessory residential use. And then it would include some minor border adjustments to the CD18 zone to match current lots that are created. So that bylaw received first reading has been referred to the Housing Advisory Committee and others for comment. And so I'm seeking the Housing Advisory comment on the proposed bylaw.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. So I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions? So just to confirm, because I was listening and writing some notes, that there's the 260 square meters. That would be the limit. The proposal is that would be the limit of the house and any accessory residential use. So a detached suite or an attached suite. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. So
and essentially, I know when this came to the Housing Advisory Committee before, you recommended, in essence, like some form of density bonusing for creating the detached secondary suite. Mm-hmm. In contrast, I got feedback from 2 other committees, so the HAC, the Environment Climate Action, and the Parks and Trails, that they were very concerned about any increase of building as a result of the rezoning. So increase in floor area, increase in lot coverage. And so the council, the staff recommendation and council recommendation was essentially that the 200, it'd be clear the 260 floor area maximum, which currently exists, would cover both the house and the suite.
Okay, and these are empty lots that haven't been nobody owns these lots, right? So there's nobody's because I know when we were looking at it before, people actually owned lots already. So if we made changes to floor space ratio, it would impact people who already purchased lots, I believe, or that was something we were looking at in the past. But this is raw. Nobody owns these yet. Nobody has expectations.
No, there's an existing house on 1676 and an existing accessory building. Like it's been owned as a residential property that now is being subdivided to turn the 1 lot into 4 lots.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Any thoughts from the committee? Anybody have any comments? So, I mean, I find it interesting, and I'm glad to hear the feedback of the other committees. Yeah, I'm of 2 minds, because I like the idea that we might provide some kind of bonus, because again, as the Housing Advisory Committee, we want to create that housing. So I still like the idea of recommending that, whether it's a reduction in the overall limit, say down to like 240 square meters, and then you can get a bonus, whatever, 100 or something like that, or whatever, some number. If you do build a secondary suite, whether it's attached or detached, I like that idea. But I hear the feedback from the other committees that they're worried about more. But my only pushback to that is somebody could build an absolutely massive garage and a workshop. You know, if they're allowed X number of accessory buildings, they're allowed X number of site coverage. So I would say if that's their feedback, reduce the site coverage, right? Like that's the way I think to reduce the building size. Because I think whether somebody builds an accessory building for residential use or an accessory building for other uses, if they can build X number of site coverage, they potentially will. Not that everybody will. So that's my only pushback on that. So if that was truly a concern, I'd look at site coverage instead of square meters of buildings. And my personal feedback would be whether you reduce the actual 260 or not, but providing some sort of bonus. I think this would be a great case where it's only 4 lots, it's one rezoning. I think it could be a really interesting chance to test out this incentive theory to see if giving people an incentive, giving people a floor space bonus will actually do that. And maybe, I know Fritz has thrown this idea out a lot, and he just mentioned a few, even if it's rental ready, like it's something like that. If people want to build a suite downstairs, a rental ready suite downstairs, and even if they use it, but it's plumbed in for the kitchen, it's got the fire ratings, it's those kind of things. I just feel like this is a great opportunity with such a small rezoning application. It's kind of a pilot project, but for our point of view, not from the proponent's point of view. I think it's a great chance. Fritz, do you have any comments? So I thought I saw you.
Yeah, it relates to the 260 square meters because that's less than 3,000 square feet, right? But depending where you are, okay, it has a lot to do with the market, what type of buyer it is, because we notice even in West Vancouver, because they don't give a bonus to a secondary suite, nobody is building them because they bought an expensive lot, now they want to build their house and they have a program in mind, and there's no spare change for there's nothing left in the square footage. So if you take 2,400 square feet in the city of Vancouver, made a perfect 3-bedroom home with small bedrooms, small bathrooms, but I'm just saying is that it's the number too. The 260, if you would set it a bit lower for an outright use, even at 240 or 230, right?
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
If you would at 20 square meters off an extra, that gives 40, that adds 400 square feet as a bonus.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I would say this as an example, council may never do it, but I would say the 260, I would make it 240, and then I would give them a bonus to 280.
Yeah, I'd almost say a 50 square meter bonus just for me, just because I think that makes a slightly more viable unit. I mean, I know 40 square meters is totally livable and possible, but I feel like 50 could give you a small 1-bedroom and it's a little more flexible. Like not everybody wants to live in a studio. So if we are encouraging it and people are going to literally take us up on it and just build the extra floor space just for a suite. I don't know if that would be, I agree with you on the, say go down to 240. And again, this is a fairly arbitrary number. I'm not fixed on it, but 240 is still a very generous, nice house.
Well, the only thing I was trying to say is that if you do 260 and now you have to give another 50, then
oh no, I'd say 240. Go down to 240
right?
and then add 50.
Yeah, if
as a bonus.
25 plus, then in a way it's a much more careful way of implementing the same objective.
Yeah. So that would be my vote as well. Go down to 240 for an outright single family and add, I'm saying 50 because I think 50 square meters makes a decent, small 1-bedroom.
Okay, yeah, sure. Okay.
Yeah, I know it's all a little arbitrary. I'm not fixed on those numbers. Anybody else has other ones, but if we're trying to build livable units, again, not to say that 40 isn't, and they could build 40, but I think 50 just gives you that extra little bit of space as a livable unit.
What I said is that you have the total would go from 240 to 280, and you can split it any way you want.
Oh, okay. So it wouldn't be okay. But. Yeah, so they could still, you're saying they could still build a 40 square meter suite and put the extra 10 into theirs.
But you're not going to build 90 square meters. It's unlikely if you buy a relatively expensive lot and you can 260. It's not going to happen. They're not going to build 90, but they may build 90 or 80 or 70, whatever.
Yeah. So is it worth putting a minimum then? So like you can get a bonus 50 square meters, but X number has to be used for a suite or whatever, or do we just, that's getting too complicated, we're overthinking it?
No, I wouldn't. Complicate matters, no.
Yeah, okay. So I'm not too fussed on the numbers. If we want to go 240, 280, or whatever number we want to recommend. Because I think to hear the feedback from the other committees, I don't want it to go like way over the top because they're concerned about site coverage and too much building. So I don't want it to be over the top, but I think it's an opportunity to have this bonus and see how many people take us up on it. Any other thoughts, Ron? Did you have any thoughts or comments? No, you're good. Maureen, Michael?
I think this, when we discussed at the council, the reason that the original motion didn't go through, there was some issues over the water, which there were issues to be resolved. Otherwise, I think that would have passed. And I know some of us were disappointed because we saw an opportunity to provide some extra accommodation, albeit a long way, recognised from the Cove. Given the issues around the Cove right now, I personally was sorry that we're actually debating this at the moment. I would have liked to have seen the original project go through. So I'm up, and I wouldn't mind seeing it revisited either. Yeah, I'm on side to make whatever practical solution we can. And as COVID departs, I agree with you, living in these tiny spaces, which at one time were so utterly fashionable. Yes, we'd all have miniature houses and live in minuscule spaces. The reality of that, especially far from the Cove, is probably, it isn't a reality at all. So good for you for suggesting the extra space, because I think people need it for livability. This is not the West End. This is not the West End. This is a lovely area far from the Cove. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Maureen, go ahead, please.
The feedback from the other committees was very strong on this point, and council listened to that feedback. I'm not sure if this recommendation from our committee will advance. That shouldn't stop us from putting it forward, and in fact we support it, but just a caution. And then the other point is that the larger project didn't advance because of water, as Michael said, and there was to be work done on advancing the MOU with King Edward Bay, etc. Has that progressed at all, Daniel? Do you know?
I haven't been a part of those, like that project from the start, so I don't have an update. I know that it, I believe at that same meeting, right, council directed staff to make it a priority, and I believe I've heard sort of discussions of it ongoing, but I'm not a part of it. Yeah. But yes, so in terms of that, it's like the council motion for the rest of it was to place it on hold until that MOU is reached, and then based on that direction, then like when the MOU is reached, staff would be returning with the remainder of the rezoning application and not needing additional council direction, but we would bring it forward at that point to say, okay, this condition has now been met, and so we would be looking to proceed with the remainder.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no other thoughts from other people, I'm just going to jump in with a couple of questions. So just looking at the report, this is a 4-hectare, 10-acre parcel, suggested to be divided into 4 lots. Are they roughly going to be equal, or do we know that yet? Or is there's a minimum lot size, presumably? I'm just wondering if we're going to recommend, continue with our recommendation of a reduced size and a bonus, do we also at the same time recommend less site coverage? Because I think then that addresses the concerns of those other, I don't want to ignore those other committees because I think they have really valid concerns. So coupled with our suggestion, do we say we lower the lot coverage to, 23% or 21, like some number, because I was just checking, these are quite large lots. So 25% lot coverage is a lot to be covered. So I don't know, Daniel, do you have that info? Is there an approximate lot size, or is that? Yeah. There
was on the presentation, and so they do range in size from, like, the smallest one is 0.36.
Okay.
But then it's like 2 hectares, and yeah, I can't read it off the image I have here.
Okay, so there were some smaller ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is a funny zone in that you're right, like the lot coverage is set, higher than some of our smaller lots, in part because the development as part of the Arbutus Ridge development are quite small lots. Whereas this property then is sort of has much larger lots, like just given the zoning, it's sort of,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it'll look
I would-
different. Yeah.
Yeah, is it, are you allowed to, or is there a precedent in other zonings? Could we say for, the smaller lot, you can have this lot coverage, for the larger lots, you can have this lot coverage? I don't know if there a precedent for that?
I mean, in essence, that's what like our SR2 zone does, where it gives a bonus or gives a flat amount and then it gives a percentage, and that kind
Right.
of functions the same
Right.
way.
So that's what I think. So that would be my suggestion then. It would be, and I don't know that I could make up the numbers right now off the top of my head, but it would be our suggestion. And Steph, I don't know if we have to type up a recommendation for this, but I would say that we're recommending reducing the floor space to 240 square meters for a single residence, and that providing a bonus of, let's say, 40 square meters or 50, let's say 50, if we're going for it, 50 square meters for a secondary suite, attached or detached. And then we recommend that lot coverage be examined to address the concerns of other committees. For example, using a fixed amount plus a percentage of the lot size, and staff to determine what that number is. It's appropriate, but I think that could flex a bit with the lot size is appropriate. Given having a minimum number that maybe suits that 0.36 hectare, like whatever the, say, 25% of that 0.36 is the minimum, for example, and then adding the percentage on top of that. But I don't know that we can have the time to put into actual numbers, so I think we just have to leave that to staff. Okay. Total to be divided, however, okay, and that lot coverage restriction be reviewed to minimize impact on the environment or green space, something like that. Maureen, I don't know, you probably, was that the concern?
Essentially, I'm just
Okay.
stuck on total to be divided, however.
That's just, it's a
Yeah.
note.
That was a note. Yeah, okay.
The file's called Scratchpad.
Yeah.
What
So
was
I-
the frick thing? We're not making the
What do
50
people think? 'Cause
square meters is the suite and 240
Yeah,
is the house.
maybe, so as a committee, what do people think? Do we want to restrict that they have to use that 50 square meter bonus specifically for a suite, or as a minimum, because they could obviously make it bigger if they want, if they are doing a multi-family house, like a multi-generational house. But what do people on the committee feel that should we be that specific about how that 50 square meters is used?
But there's already a maximum size for secondary suites, right?
At the moment, yes, I think it's still
Yeah.
it's still the 60-40 split, I think, at the
They
moment.
can use the 290 square meters, fine, and 90 square meters of that can be a secondary suite.
And they could also make it a 330 square meter, right, suite, if they wanted to. I don't know if there's a minimum, but yeah, so that's up to them. But they have to obviously put one in, and really you can't, arguably do less than 30 is pretty non-livable. So yeah, that was just more my question, is do we want to force them to use that 50 square meters as the secondary suite if they're getting the bonus for it, which I'm kind of leaning towards, because if you're getting the bonus, but then maybe it doesn't really provide a bonus if they're forced to use it in one way or another. So I'm a bit on the fence. I'm kind of a, let's just leave it, not be so prescriptive. It's literally 3 or 4 houses that are going to be built. I don't think we need to worry, and this is just a sort of a test.
Look,
And
but Danielle, the regulations for secondary suites still apply, right? And that gives the maximum of 90.
Yeah, I'm not so worried
yeah.
about maximum. I'm not so worried about maximum, Fritz, because people can do whatever they want. I'm worried about minimum. I'm worried that people are going to get the bonus 50 and they're going to make a, 20 square meter room or something like that. I don't even know how to live in that. But.
It's more like that should be in the secondary bylaw for every house.
Right.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
That there's a minimum size. So
That's
I'm inclined to just leave it. I think we don't need to be so prescriptive and see what happens. Again, this isn't like an island-wide bylaw review. This is just sort of this one place. I'm just really curious to see if people, if it gets passed, how much uptake there is. And I think that would be really interesting feedback. So I wonder if we should say, and that lot coverage restrictions be reviewed to minimize impact on the environment and green space.
Yes.
The environment and green space. And then I want to say based on feedback from other committees. Because we are acknowledging their feedback. And that, other committees. And then period, the next sentence being that staff look to other precedents in other zonings to adjust coverage based on lot size.
Yes.
Does that, Daniel, does that make sense? Does that suit kind of what we've been saying verbally? I think you understand. Yeah, to look to other precedents, sorry, Steph, in other zonings, in other zones, to adjust lot coverage. Yeah, adjust lot coverage with the size of the lot. Yeah. Do we need to put an example in there to be specific? I don't know, Maureen, Michael, would it be helpful if we put an for example, 100 square meters plus 2% of the lot? Would that be helpful to council to see that that's what we mean?
I'm not sure.
I think it's more helpful to say the goal of it is to have to have lower maximum lot coverage on bigger lots or something.
Okay, I think that's great. Yeah. I just want to be clear
Thank
about
you.
what we're
Thank
saying
you.
about that. So I think that's great. So yeah, if you could do that, Steph, delete the example part in brackets and just say comma with the goal of less lot coverage as the lot gets bigger.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that it's our intent is clear there. Okay, so I'll read this out, that the Housing Advisory Committee recommend that council direct staff to reduce the maximum floor area to 240 square meters and offer a 50 square meter bonus for the creation of detached or attached secondary suite, and that lot coverage restrictions be reviewed to minimize impact on the environment and green space based on feedback from other committees, and that staff look to precedents in other zones to adjust the lot coverage with the size of the lot, with the goal of less lot coverage as the site gets bigger. I think that sums it up. Does anybody have any other little wordsmithing they want to do? Nope, seeing none. Okay, I'm gonna move. Do we have a second? Yeah, thanks, Ron. I saw, and then everybody's in favor. Yeah, hands up. Any Maureen? Any comments?
I'm going to abstain on this one. I haven't had enough chance to really get my head around it. So
okay,
when I abstain, it counts as a positive.
Right, sure, but acknowledged, abstention acknowledged. Nonetheless. Okay. So excellent. Let's move on because I think we're quite behind time. And we've got poor Daniel has another thing to present to us. It's the Daniel
At
show
least
today.
it's all in one meeting.
It is, yeah. Okay, so we have a business license year-end report.
Okay. So then I'll just go through, this is just to give you an idea, and I think this is mostly referred to the committee because of the short-term rental pieces, so I'll just try to focus on that. So this is what I presented in a report to council. It's just how many business licenses were issued in 2021. So we issued 504. In comparison, in 2019, we issued 315. So we've had a big increase. I don't think that necessarily reflects like business activity on Bowen so much as like increased reach of the business license program. And one of the things I noted is we've been much more effective, I think, at licensing contractors and off-island businesses coming to Bowen, especially with the sort of construction industry. One of the things we've started doing is contracting a monitoring company called Harmari that monitors active short-term rental listings, so bed and breakfasts or residential guest accommodations on the island, and identifies them. So this is the image that I shared with the Community Economic Development Committee, so dated January 10th. And the little blue circles are showing number of listings shown throughout the island. And it gives a little dashboard on what's done. So it identifies 127 active listings. And I'll just note sort of that's showing, like, it'll end up listing each unit as a separate listing. So if you run a B&B where you have 4 rooms, it'll list each one as a separate listing. So, but it gives those overall numbers that, you know, the average nightly rate for a short-term rental on Bowen is $237. It estimates a 45% average occupancy. And so as of February 28th, I'll say that what our business license inspectors told me, there's 22 of those listings are not identified as of early February, but 12 were subsequently identified the last couple of weeks and have sent notices to people of the need for the business license. So it's something that's ongoing. Most of the ones that aren't identified are recent listings that are harder to track down, and it's sort of an ongoing process. And we end up with a number of applicants sort of somewhere in the licensing process where they've applied for an application, but they need more information or something. So it's sort of a moving target all the time, but something that staff are actively working on is trying to ensure that every listing is identified and then is licensed. Hamari has a number of stats that show sort of the state of the short-term rental market. So they're showing listings over time, and they're showing sort of in 2020, if you think of it like low point with COVID and listings taken down, what we've seen starting, it's like summer of 2021, sort of that growth of listings again over time. So maybe COVID worries subsiding to some extent, more active listings coming back on. And we see this as well when we look at, they track what they estimate as the revenue made by short-term rental operators on Bowen. So in 2019, almost $1 million in revenue, and dropping in 2020 to 600,000. Slight increase in 2021, and be curious to see in 2022. The other piece that I thought was relevant for this discussion is since this report was done, is the census came out for 2021 numbers. Just the high level numbers at this point, but what they show is the population, the number of private dwellings, the number of private dwellings occupied by usual resident. And then from that, you can do the math and figure out, okay, what's the number of private dwellings not occupied by usual residents? So between 2016 and 2021, Bowen had quite a large population increase. But interestingly, it's like, so we had 121 additional private dwellings be added in the census period, but then we saw a decrease in those private dwellings not occupied by usual residents. So in the 2016 census, there were 420, and in the 2021 census, there were 312. So in essence, if you think about population growth on Bowen, about half came from new dwellings and about half came from dwellings that are now occupied by usual resident. And so then the ratio of dwellings that are occupied by usual resident has gone from 78% to 84%. So, fairly significant increase. And I think is relevant when talking about short-term rentals too, and what's the effect on the dwelling stock on Bowen is that at least over the last census period, it's actually, or the number of residents, dwellings not occupied by usual residents. So be it short-term rental or be it, summer cabin or whatever the case may be, that number has actually decreased on Bowen. And then I have, that's the end of what I shared initially. I have a number of just more data from Hamari that's sort of stuck on the end of this PowerPoint that I can go through if people have, specific interests or questions, but maybe I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Ron, go ahead.
Daniel, two quick questions. The upward trend in homes being occupied by the owners, is that because vacation homes are being sold to permanent residents? I
think that's the key piece of it. Yeah, I think that when places get sold now, they're bought by somebody looking to live on.
Thank you. And second question, going back to your listing of businesses, is that businesses based on Bowen Island or doing business on Bowen Island?
Doing business on Bowen Island. So the contractor or the non-resident business is the category that's off. So that's 112 of the 504 are non-resident businesses.
Thank you.
That is 20%.
Maureen, go ahead.
Daniel, can you go back to the StatsCan slide?
Sure.
The definitions that are being used by StatsCan are really important here because it's easy to misunderstand what is being represented here. So where it says private dwellings occupied by usual resident, and again, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, that doesn't mean that they are owner occupied. It means that it's a primary residence, and it could be an owner occupied or it could be renter occupied. So we actually, I don't think, can say anything conclusive about the shift in proportions of renters and owners on Bowen Island. That data comes later in the year. Nonetheless, that's 75 to 83%, or actually higher than that, isn't it? 76 to 85%. That's a really big change. I know that in some years ago, I took a a data science course with SFU's city program, and Bowen Island at 23% at that time of not occupied by usual residents was a huge outlier in this area. When you put it in the context, though, of other Gulf Islands, our percentages are of private dwellings not occupied by usual residents were actually we have a much smaller proportion. So some of that data might be of interest for this committee as well, to see how we can compare over time, as this shows on Bowen, but also how we compare over time with the other Gulf Islands.
That's a good point.
Thanks, Maureen. I think that's really interesting because it for me solidifies Bowen's place as this very unique spot. We are, you know, a unique sort of rural outlier in Metro Vancouver, but then we're also this unique kind of urban cousin to the Gulf Islands. So we're in this really interesting spot, and I think this just personifies it. So any other comments? Because we're sort of, we have a couple more things to get through if we can on time, but I think this was good information. Daniel, if I'm correct, you're not looking for strict feedback. This is sort of for information only.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I think, Maureen, that's a good reminder. I look forward to maybe getting an update, whether it's from our committee or if Daniel gives us another update over the year as the StatsCan information comes out. I think that'll be really interesting to keep examining those. Yeah, great. Okay, so if no further questions on that, we'll move on to number 7, which is our subcommittee report. I think given that we don't have a lot of time, and it's quite, it's a fairly substantial thing that was written up. So I first want to say thank you so much to Ron. He did a ton of work. He called, emailed, he like ran around and chased people and talked to them. He did an extremely thorough job researching this. I'm really, really impressed. Sadly, I could not do it justice in the last week or so. I've been so busy, so I haven't had a chance to really thoroughly review it and thoroughly edit it and add. So we did meet last week. I added some things. So maybe what I'll just invite the committee to do, if we could, over the next month or whenever we're going to agree to next meet, if you could go over it, and if maybe we start an email discussion, if people do have thoughts, or if people want to edit it, or add things in and send them to me, and then we can bring it back on the next agenda and look at it again. Hopefully we can give ourselves more time and sort of really go through it. But if people do have a chance to read it and want to send comments or feedback or meet over the coming weeks to discuss it, I think it's a really important document and I don't want to rush it today. So Ron, did you have anything quick that you might want to say or point out? No, okay. And I think one of the things I'll point out that sort of surprised me and I think was really valid is Ron discovered that I wouldn't have thought of. He brought up a lot of different issues in this report, or at least a couple of different issues that I wouldn't have thought of, but I think that they're quite valid and good to look at. Again, just highlighting the need, but saying, it's actually not appropriate maybe for us to address it because of this, that, and the other. So I think it's valid to have those things in there and address them. So okay, so everybody have a read and yeah, let's discuss by email and then we'll bring it back to the committee next time. Maureen, go ahead.
Can we have a moment to look at the revision to the affordable housing policy?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Is everybody okay for time? Because I know we were meant to wrap up about now. Are we okay to go to 11:30? Yeah. Oh, I'm not seeing any objections. So we'll do a hard stop at 11:30. So we'll move on from the housing targets, and that'll be by email. Do we want to, just before we stop, because then we can go right to the minute, can we establish the date for the next meeting first, and then we can go and look at the affordable housing, because I think that can be pretty much it. So it seems to be that these Monday mornings work well for people. So if we want to look, roughly 4 weeks ahead, the 28th of March. Steph, you tell us what works.
Can we do the 4th of April?
The 4th? Yeah, that should be fine.
I can't.
No, can't. Okay,
No.
What about the week after that? So go to the odd one, the 11th? Oh, I might be away that week. The
11th would be possible. What was wrong? Sorry, what was wrong with the first date suggested?
The 28th?
Sorry, the 28th.
The 28th?
I'm going away, but I can get coverage.
Oh, okay.
No problem.
Would you mind? Because I think that would
That's
work
fine.
better for everybody
Yep.
if we, yeah. So the 28th, 9:30, the usual time? Yeah, not seeing any objections. Okay. So let's do that. Thanks, Steph. We'll miss you and we'll see you back next time. So, okay, let's move on to Maureen wanted to look at the revised, oh, sorry, I've got clicking on something here. The revised, sorry, housing policy, which I don't have up because I didn't open it from my email. Okay, here we go. Affordable housing policy. I don't know if does Steph, do you have it, or do you want me
Yeah, I
to
do.
screen
Sorry,
share?
I'm just.
No, it's okay. Why don't I screen share and then I can scroll through it.
Okay, I just emailed it to you this morning.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, does everybody see that? This is the policy here, affordable housing policy. Okay, Maureen, you take it away.
Okay, so if you recall, we asked for a revision to this policy to highlight that there was an option to provide an equivalent financial contribution to the Housing Reserve Fund. So if whoever's controlling here, if you could just scroll down, keep going. So the revision is to point D. And I believe that's the only revision in the policy. Is that correct?
Point E?
D as in Douglas.
The
Sorry,
15%?
point E. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think so, other than change to just formatting, but yeah.
okay. So my concern is I don't think the revision that's being made here is clear enough. So what's being done is the last clause, the semicolon, and then or make an equivalent financial contribution to the Housing Reserve Fund has been added there. And the language doesn't work from my perspective, because it's being tacked on to a statement about these units are intended to be cost neutral to the developer. And it's not sufficiently clear that what we're talking about is alternatively to make an equivalent financial contribution. So I just like the language to be tidied up. I went back and looked at what council directed staff to do, which was to prepare an amendment. There was no direction from staff specifically about the language that should be used in the policy. So I'm not sure what to do here. Daniel, is it sufficient for me to express a concern that the language needs to be clarified? And
Yeah,
then,
I see what you mean looking at it, and we can change that.
great. So I mean, even just ending the cost neutral to the development period, and then just adding an alternatively make, I think that would help.
Okay.
What do the rest of you think?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if it's maybe point D becomes, something along the lines of a preamble. To meet this, the developer has the option, and then subpoint 15%, subpoint Housing Reserve Fund contribution. So it's really clear that there's two options. I think that's what you're getting at, Maureen, right? It's not just sort of a footnote. It's like really clear. You have two options to follow. Yeah. Okay, so something along those lines.
It's too buried here and ambiguous. So that's great if those changes could be made.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then we're going to not be too specific, right? Like the equivalent financial contribution, because who makes that determination? Because right now,
How do you
it says,
calculate that?
yeah, the first part says actually refers to as defined by the Affordable Housing Working Group or the Bowen Island Housing Corporation, which to my knowledge, neither of which exist at the moment. So I'm not sure if it's appropriate to keep those in, or if it's like as defined by, the committee directed by council, or I don't know if there's other language, but I'm not sure if it's appropriate to keep those two in because they don't exist. Or some other definition, as defined by CMHC, BC Housing, or an equivalent, measure, something along those lines. That's what would be my feedback. I don't know the exact answer off the top of my head, but I'm wondering if Maureen, Michael, what do you think? Is it appropriate to take those out since we're revising?
I would leave it. And
Okay.
I leave it in part because the direction from council for the policy relates specifically to the equivalent financial contribution. So we have consensus from council on that.
Right. So don't touch anything else. Just add the bit.
We did.
Okay. So then my only other question then is, and maybe it's not a question, maybe it's fine, but is there any definition to equivalent financial contribution, or is there any desire to put any kind of definition on that?
No, we went down the path of discussion on this point in last council, and it became very clear that it was going to be a matter of negotiation and discussion with any developers who were interested in
Right.
going that
So
route.
leave it open. Don't be too prescriptive. Okay. Yep.
Okay. Thank
Any
you.
other, any other thoughts? So that really it's kind of a housekeeping. That's my memory of this. It's a little bit of a housekeeping to get this up to scratch to align with the Housing Reserve Fund and everything. So yeah, Ron, I see your hand there. Yep.
So does this give the developer the option of doing the one or the other?
Yes. And I would think, or a combination thereof, I would think that would also be an option
Right.
if they wanted to.
I guess I would just comment on what the experience is in Edmonton. In Edmonton, the policy is that developers are required to provide for affordable housing, and then if for some reason it's impossible, then they make a contribution, and it seems invariably they persuade council that it's impossible for them to do that, and they just buy their way out of it. That money goes, they put money into a fund, and who knows whatever becomes of that. And I just wondered if we wanted to prioritize the affordable housing inclusion and making the financial contribution, at the discretion of council, perhaps.
Yeah, I would think that all of this is at discretion of council, right? Because this really comes forward at a rezone. I hear you, Ron. I think that's really good feedback to see how it's actually playing out in other communities. But I would think because this really only comes into play at a rezoning, which, let's face it, is a highly negotiated situation, like there's a lot of back and forth between proponents and staff and council. I would say same, like, I think it would achieve that, Ron. Like, I think that it would be up to the council of the day to do that. And, I'm thinking of a couple of the smaller ones, like the distillery or the pub, the pub may be okay, but the distillery, I know it was really to shoehorn in those units. And I'm sure it would have worked better for them and the use of the building, only knowing the building code for the use of the building. Had they been able to simply make a contribution, I think it would have made that building easier and all of that stuff. So I think it's a nice thing to give people an option. And yeah, I think then it's really up to the council of the day. If there's a big development happening and they're saying, oh, no, we can't do it, we need to buy our way out, that council can kind of push back and say, well, no, you can't, you can do this. And I think that can be part of the negotiations. I don't know, I'm speaking, Maureen, Michael, I don't know if you have comments on that.
I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay.
I think understanding is accurate in pointing to some of the small projects where we've ended up with orphan affordable housing units that are difficult for the building owners to manage in some instances, is sort of an unintended consequence of staying too closely to the 15%.
Yeah.
In every instance.
Okay, well, if there's no other comments on that, Maureen, does that sort of, that satisfies your review of it? Great, thanks for bringing it up, because it wasn't quite on my radar, so that's really good. Daniel, anything further from us on this point?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, great. Well, with 2 minutes to go before our, bumped deadline, if everyone else is good, I think we just had sort of new business and some information items. So if nobody else has anything, we'll adjourn and see you in 4 weeks. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, not seeing any objections. Okay, excellent. Oh, sorry, I can stop my screen sharing. I was like, why can't I see everybody? I wish Steph would stop sharing. Okay, thank you, everybody. Nice to see you. Thanks for all your time. I think really good discussion today. Thanks, Daniel, for all your work. And we'll see you in 4 weeks.